Jason belongs in hell, and I'm going to see he gets there. Hello, huge movie fanatic Nate coming at you, continuing my reviews of the Friday the 13th movies. Today I'm coming at you to review Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. So this movie is, when I got into the Friday the 13th movies, this was the second newest one. The newest one on home video at the time was Part 7, and this was the one that came before it. And just like with Final Chapter, during the summer when I was 12, I recorded Final Chapter off TV onto tape, and just like that, that summer when I was 12, I recorded Jason Lives off TV. Jason Lives and New Blood were among the Jason movies I watched the most when I was a kid, when I first got into these movies, because, when I was a kid I was like, oh, well, the most recent ones are the coolest ones, it's just kind of 12-year-old mentality, those are the ones I want to watch. So this one got a lot of play, the version I taped off TV, I got a lot of rewatch value out of it when I was 12. So this movie really kind of, when I watch it, really brings me back to, that summer of just watching this movie over and over, that I had taped off TV. So off the bat, that's one of the things about this movie that really stands out for me. So, in my opinion, this is kind of, Jason Lives is kind of Jason Goes Mainstream, really. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives is probably the most, in my opinion, the most mainstream Jason. These days, if you said mainstream Jason, it'd be like, oh, or even in the 80s, maybe, if you were to say mainstream Jason, you'd be more of a shudder of fear down your spine. But the writer/director of this movie pulled, the mainstreaming of Jason off in a way that I would applaud. I think that it could have gone very, very, very bad. I absolutely, I don't know if it's because I saw this when I was 12 or whatever, but I think even if having rewatched it recently, I think if I would have seen this, for the first time at any age, I think the same thing of it. I think it's the mainstream aspect of it, or just the more accessible aspect of it is really worked for this movie, and in the humor involved in it, I think really worked for the movie. So, like I say, the mainstream of it could have went really bad, but luckily it turned out to really go good, or at least in my opinion. This is the first Friday the 13th to be released theatrically and whatever, probably ultra stereo or something like that, and it shows. I mean, the sound is, well, of course now all the Blu-rays are 5.1, but back in the day in VHS and Laserdisc, and even the first DVDs that came out, this was the first one to actually be in stereo for quite a while. And the sound really, obviously in stereo shines a lot more. And the opening scene of this movie, ironically, is exactly like the opening scene of Part 5, A New Beginning, which is kind of interesting. It's funny, when I reviewed that movie, how I said, when they dug him up and Jason looks so cool in the dream sequence of that movie, I wish that's what Jason would have looked like for the rest of the movie. Well, they kind of do that this time. They kind of had, obviously they had that ridiculous idea of digging Jason up and him just springing back to life for the 5th movie, but they thought it was so ridiculous for that movie they'll just do a dream sequence. This movie, they actually take that ridiculous idea and kind of try to make it work as good as possible. I love the atmosphere of the opening scene when driving an old truck. It's not the same one, but it's something very similar, kind of old truck from presumably Pinehurst, or wherever the hell he's staying. Well, actually maybe not Pinehurst, because the owner of that is dead or whatever, but driving an old truck and still probably living in some kind of institution. Him and a buddy, probably a crazy buddy, Tommy Jarvis and a crazy buddy, go to the cemetery to basically, Tommy Jarvis has this, obsession with Jason and obsession with seeing the corpse so he can finally put his PTSD to rest, or better work through his demons and stuff. It should also be said that this is the 3rd and final film in what I call the Tommy Jarvis trilogy, and unlike 5, but it's not the guy who played Tommy Jarvis's fault. It's just the thankless role he was dealt. Unlike 5, the character of Tommy Jarvis in this movie I find much more entertaining, and he carries the movie much more than the guy in Part 5. But again, that's not his fault, it's the writer's fault. And one thing that I don't think I even realized it until I just rewatched it, is like, Tommy Jarvis must have gotten contacts, because all of a sudden the glasses are gone. So either his eyes just miraculously improved, or he has since gotten contacts. But it's strange that I don't think I ever even thought about that until just recently. So I've lived with this movie for, I don't know what, over 20 years of my life, and that never even occurred to me until just a couple days ago, so whatever. So the opening scene is absolutely fantastic, where Tommy Jarvis and a nutty, inmate buddy of his go to dig up Jason's grave, and everything would have been absolutely fine, but Tommy Jarvis digs up the grave, and luckily, the movie doesn't go so ridiculous where Jason is buried with the hockey mask. They actually have, presumably the mask that Tommy brings with is, maybe, I don't know what, they don't really explain it. I mean, it's not Roy's because it doesn't look like that, but whatever. We'll just say, well, maybe when Tommy hacked up Jason, maybe he took the mask. So what's kind of cool about the beginning of this movie is Tommy Jarvis brings Jason back his mask, and his intention, I guess, was to dig up the body and burn it. Like that's gonna, burn the corpse, and that way, I guess if he can destroy the corpse in more than it is already rotted as being buried, then he'll feel better about whatever. It's just kind of obviously just a weak plot point to get Jason up and living again. And once he sees Jason's corpse, which does appear to be dead and everything, with all the mealworms and maggots or whatever the hell is crawling around on Jason's corpse face, he just has flashbacks, and he gets so pissed off, he rips off this part of this metal fence. It's kind of like a metal pole, and he just proceeds to stab Jason Voorhees' corpse over and over and over, and just leave that in there. And he goes to get the gas, and it's kind of a stormy night, or as they're doing all this stuff, a storm is approaching, and then as soon as they go over to get the gas can, lightning strikes the pole. The guy who made this movie was very much influenced by, like, if memory serves, like old 30s, Universal horror monster movies and stuff. So it's got this movie kind of has that, a little bit of that influence in it, and this would be one of the things that kind of really harkens back to that most. So, it's Tommy Jarvis's, the ironic thing about this whole movie is it's Tommy's freaking fault that Jason is zapped back to life with this lightning bolt, and starts a new kind of freaking killing rampage, which is just absolutely ridiculous. The opening scene is really cool, and when Jason is revived and just killing his buddy with just his hand, and shoving his hand through his body and coming out the back holding his heart. I mean, I'm surprised they got away with as much of the gore as they did in this movie. The kills are really, really just high energy and really, really fun, and the overall feel of this movie is just really just high energy, fun. It's a good time. It's just like the ultimate kind of summer Friday 13th movie. And I was too young to see this in the theater, but I kind of jealous of the teens or the 20 or somethings that got to actually see this in the theater back when it came out. It must have been a really great time, and if you see it with the right audience when it came out, it was probably really fun. So the beginning of the movie, basically what Tommy wanted to do didn't go as planned. It was the exact opposite. He probably never would have imagined that his intention to go to the grave to dig up and burn the body would lead to Jason coming back to life. And what an idiot! So he basically, seeing his friend get killed, Tommy goes and drives away in his truck, and Jason basically steps up out of the grave and grabs the mask and puts it on in a really cool kind of Jason's back little bit, and then zooming into the eye, we kind of do a James Bond Jason thing, where instead of coming and walking into frame and turning and shooting a gun, he walks into the frame and turns and swipes the machete in this really cool kind of title sequence of the blood splatter making Jason Lives, and then another slash across the screen making Friday 13th Part 6. It should also be said that unfortunately, well, it's fortunate, but it's also unfortunate. This will be the very last time for the '80s Friday 13th movies that Harry Manfredini will return to do an original score. His music will be used, of course, in the Part 7, but those are just rehashed cues from previous movies, and a lot of them being from this movie. So it is unfortunate that that this will be the last of the '80s Harry Manfredini original scores. But I mean, up until this point, I mean, he's done so much that it's not that big a deal. But So after the opening credits, Tommy arrives at the sheriff's sheriff's office or police station to to run in there and say, oh my gosh, what I've done, and oh, Jason's alive, he's gonna come and kill everyone. The guy. One thing, having rewatched this just recently, the Sheriff Garris is kind of annoying. Just a character that, I mean, it's kind of realistic that this Tommy Jarvis is basically a nut job. So I mean, by coming in and saying we brought him back to life and he's on another rampage from a nut job, you kind of necessarily wouldn't believe him. But as the movie goes on, and having just rewatched it, it does get kind of annoying. Just Sheriff Garris's unwillingness to believe what's going on, even though at the behest of all the characters just insisting this is what's going on. But basically he goes to this cop or the Sheriff Garris for help, and he gets instantly just thrown in jail. And what's really kind of cool about this movie is we find out what the writer does with this movie. Oh, it should also be said, this is the very first time, actually, since the very first movie that, although it's not obviously the same filming location, for all intents and purposes, this movie does take place at Camp Crystal Lake, now renamed Camp Forest Green, which is really kind of a cool idea and realistic, actually. You can see city council people doing this kind of meaningless bullshit to try to get away from a dark past or whatever. But in the movie, the camp is renamed Camp Forest Green, and actually I think the whole town or something or whatever is no longer called Crystal or whatever. But the camp is now renamed Camp Forest Green to try to get away from that Camp Blood mystique that Crystal Lake obviously has had since Jason drowned in the events of the first movie and stuff. So it is kind of cool that. It's kind of weird that it took 6 sequels or 5 sequels to get a movie where it actually takes place at Camp Crystal Lake again. And it is kind of cool that although it's kind of sucks to see like a new name on the sign or whatever, it's kind of a cool writing, modern at the time, or a new twist to rename the camp altogether. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of a cool detail. So Sheriff Garris's daughter is introduced the next day, and Megan, and she's pretty hot. She's got a nice little butt on her, and she's hot. And the women in this movie aren't for me this movie's not chock full of like as many hot women as some of the previous movies. Like just Megan. I don't even really like the girl that Court gets that hooks up with later on in the movie. I probably thought she was cute when I was a kid, but as I got older, it's not like I'd turn her away if she wanted to hop in the sack or anything, but she doesn't really do. She's just more annoying to me in my older age, and she doesn't do a lot for me. So there's not a whole hell of a lot of crazy sexy women in this. Obviously Megan is kind of the final girl of this movie, and she's probably the hottest. And then the Sissy, to me Sissy, Megan and Sissy are like the hottest girls in this movie. So it's not really just full of just hot women, and in a way you kind of got to respect that. They got some just maybe more average looking girls in the movie as well. So maybe that's commendable in its own right. So whatever. Right off the bat, towards the beginning of the movie, on a foggy night, that's something that I will say that I don't really like about the look of the movie. It doesn't happen too incredibly often, maybe actually just kind of the beginning scenes here. But again, taking from the old Universal Monster movies, the director has, for this first couple of kills in the movie, this fog, drifting, floating across the ground, which I don't really like personally, but it's his movie, he can do what he wants. But the first couple kills are a couple counselors driving to Camp Forest Green in the movie, and another VW bug. I don't know how many, you could probably count throughout the series how many VW bugs appear in the series, and then you could probably come to a number if you counted. But first off the bat, what's really cool is Jason's just standing in the road with this big long metal pole that revived him with the the bolt of electricity. And what's really cool, he's just standing in front of it, like saying no, basically saying no one it will be permitted. Even though they renamed it to him, it's the same area. As Tommy says, even if you rename it, it's still Camp Crystal Lake to him. And the first 2 kills in the movie are so fun, and pretty much all the kills are mostly really fun and just really great. And the stabbing the guy with the pole and just throwing him over Jason's head, and crashing the pole through the windshield of the VW bug, and really, really, really cool kills in this movie. Um, yeah, it's just, I can't even imagine what the reaction was, you know, opening weekend. I mean, even today the kills are still really cool because, you know, nothing's really done like this. Your kills weren't really done like this in horror movies anymore, and I can't imagine the reaction back then. It must have been a hoot, man. So Tommy Jarvis spends like the first half of this movie like locked up in jail, and during that time we see, you know, Jason's basically on a hike, kind of a quest back to Camp Crystal Lake. So probably half of the first half of the movie, Jason's just on his way, walking through the woods, you know, walking through the woods on his way back to Camp Crystal Lake, and on his way there he encounters a group of these, I don't know, guys working, these corporate assholes working, you know, these insurance salesmen that are doing this work paintball fest thing, and it's really funny scene. I mean, unfortunately, it could have lasted a little bit longer even for me, but it's really funny. It should be said. I mean, I've already said it, but I mean, this movie is just a nice mashup of horror / comedy. I mean, you really, you know, you probably actually call it more of a comedy than I'd even call it a horror movie. It's just such a absolutely fantastic blend of horror and comedy. But this paintball scene is great, and it's just basically, you know, just extra bodies, obviously, to kill until Jason actually gets to the camp to start killing some of the main characters. But, you know, in a lot of movies, like, you know, well, I gave kind of, well, I said it about the New Beginning as well, where it's just to introduce these characters, just to kill them seemed all the more blatantly just whatever. Like in this movie, even if you introduce them, like the paintball players, just to kill them, at least I mean, he manages in such a short amount of time, right after they're introduced, to kind of give them all an individual character. So the writer / director was really, really competent in that, you know, they weren't just introduced, you know, bodies just for Jason to then kill. Even in the limited time you get with the paintball players, you do kind of form a little bit of personalities and stuff in that time, which is really kind of remarkable if you think about it. And the way the paintball people are dispatched with the triple decapitation, for example, is absolutely amazing. And the one guy just kind of by instinct just points the paintball gun at Jason and just shoots, and it's just like, and Jason's just like, what the fuck? He doesn't say that, but he's kind of thinking it, I think. And absolutely one of the most fantastic, there's so many great kills in this, it's hard to frickin', you know, pick a favorite, but one of the most fantastic kills in this movie is the guy with Jason gets his little kind of weapons belt and machete from this one guy, you know, dude who'd already been killed in the paintball gun game, and he's hacking, he's just, women should be in the kitchen where they belong, and hacking all this branches and stuff with a machete, and one of his swipes, he goes up and, you know, Jason catches it and throws the guy against the tree, and the shots, and the bit of him going up towards the tree and hitting the tree and then like falling to the side and seeing the love, you know, the heart or whatever carved in it with the blood splattered on it, was so funny. And then as a kind of a, you know, to punctuate the frickin' kill, Jason picks up the machete, and then you see he's not only holding the machete but then the guy's arm, and it's just like, oh my god. In a way, it would have been cool to actually possibly have another Friday the 13th that's this fun and just this tongue-in-cheek and has so much fun with the subject matter. It would have been almost cool to have another one like this. But like I said in reviews past, like, I guess just having one makes that one all the more special. So thank you very much to the writer / director of this one, because it's a hoot, man. So this is actually, with the exception of the opening scene, from the very first movie, this is the only Friday the 13th to actually have a camp full of basically kid, you know, boy and girl campers, which is another thing that I'll commend the writer / director of this movie for. It must have been kind of a pain in the ass to get all these kids to be campers in the movie, but that's an element that I also appreciate, especially since, you know, in the first 5 movies, with the exception of the opening scene of the first one, you know, the movies, you know, are about camp and all this kind of stuff, and they've never actually had it where the camp was open and operating with actual campers. So it's actually kind of cool. It takes 6 movies for that to actually happen. Unfortunately, by the time it does happen, it's no longer called Camp Crystal Lake, but whatever. You know, the writer / director really manages to work in some cool things. And he doesn't have the kids just be there just for no reason. He has fun with the kids, like that scene where Court is trying to explain, just in his making up, ad-libbing stuff about Indian markers and all this kind of stuff. They do manage to incorporate the kids relatively well throughout the movie and make them not just kind of a prop, but actually a part of the movie and scenes as well. So that was really, really cool part about this movie too. Another thing about this movie that is similar to the first movie took place on Friday the 13th, which is something I don't think I mentioned in my review of the first movie, which is, that is the day that, as Jason's mom said in the end of that movie, that Jason was born. It's basically Jason's birthday. So that is the reason why in the first movie that she probably kills on, waits until the 13th. Maybe not Friday every time, but, maybe probably kills on June. I would imagine Jason's birthday is June 13th. So whether it happens on a Friday or not, she'll kill on that day or whatever. But this is the first sequel, and the first and the last of the 80s Friday the 13th movies. With the exception of, I guess the opening of New Blood, I think, took place on Friday the 13th, with, the young character Tina, I think. But with the exception of that, I mean, this is the only sequel in the 80s to actually take place, the latter half of the movie, the last day/night of this movie with all the kind of the carnage and stuff at Camp Forest Green actually takes place on Friday the 13th, and he actually has a character saying that. He's like, you picked the right day to pull this shit. What do you mean? Happy Friday the 13th. So it's really strange that, there are so many sequels that didn't even mention that at all. It's almost something that you'd think that they'd have to do, but it get kind of repetitive, I guess, after a while. So that's yet another thing that the writer/director was really, he really tried to put as much as he could into this movie, and God, he did a really great job. Yeah, having just rewatched the movie recently, it never really occurred to me until just recently when Sissy kind of explains to the other camper or the other counselor that, in their cabin, counselor cabin at night, that this card game Sissy came up with called Camp Blood, where the piles of cards represents cabins, and the face cards are counselors, and one of the cards is Jason. You shuffle them all up in the piles of cards, which are cabins. You got to figure out which cabin Jason is in. That's actually really kind of a cool idea, and just another thing that the writer interjected into this movie that is just so creative. And I wonder, I'm not too sure the rules of the game are that fleshed out. I don't know how you'd then play the game. I mean, she kind of sets up how the way to start it, but I don't know then how you'd play the game. Feel free to let me know if you've ever tried playing that game, card game Camp Blood, or not. I mean, I'm sure, it's mostly set up in the movie for it. I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult to figure out how to play it, but I guess maybe, you could do it where, a player would take a card off a cabin or something, and if a player took a card off a cabin and it was the Jason card, then maybe they got killed or something. That would be really cool. And then maybe you'd take Jason and the remaining cabin cards and shuffle them back up, and then redisperse them into however many cabin piles you make, and then that'd be kind of cool. I mean, there's really nothing involved in doing it other than just pulling a card off piles. But I don't know. I'm sure some fan has kind of devised a better way to play Camp Blood with a card game. But that's really another cool point in the movie as well. One of the biggest problems I have with this movie is, the sex, the quote-unquote sex scene, the clothed sex. It's just like this movie gets just about everything else dead perfect right, or even better than expected, except for, the sex scene with Court and, the girl. I do think it is cool how they, actually have like an RV in this movie for the very first time, and how they hooked up and got it on in the back of the RV, and the introduction of the sex scene to seeing the RV bouncing is kind of funny. But gosh, the older I get, and it's just like, oh my God. When I was 12, the sex scene kind of passed because, I hadn't seen much at that point. But being, getting on in years and having seen more, it's just like the sex scene really doesn't hold up and for me at all, and just the clothed sex, and it's just like, I don't know, maybe there's people that is kind of, maybe there's a fetish where people like to have sex with their clothes on. I don't know, but I didn't really appreciate it, being more of a unclothed sex fan myself. That's probably one of my biggest complaints, if not biggest complaint with this movie, is just clothed sex. I mean, just like, I don't know, and just But as I already said, you know, having the RV in a Friday the 13th movie is great, and the kills of, you know, the kill of the smashing the, you know, is it Nikki? Is that the girl's name? The girl I don't really like. She's kind of like an Ali Sheedy wannabe, very much so. Just smashing her face on the side of the camper and making the, oh, what an amazing kill, making an outline of her face with her mouth open, coming pushing out of the, you know, outside of the camper, and you know, just jabbing the knife in Accord's head, which you can tell is censored. You know, it's not the original. You know, you can tell it's censored, that killing, stabbing this knife in his head. But you know, having the RV then flip over and just, you know, scrape, you know, to a stop on its side, and the absolutely freaking fantastic, iconic image of Jason, you know, standing on top of this burning RV that's, you know, tipped over on its side is just. I hope someone made a poster of that, because it's just one of the most iconic Jason images, because it's this, you know, burning, this RV which kind of represents camping on its side, just smoking and burning, and Jason standing on top of it, just being like, one down, you know, more to go. It's just really, really a cool image. So I don't know, halfway point, or maybe even more, maybe even more like the hour mark of this movie. Megan, the daughter of Sheriff Garris, manages to break Tommy out of jail, and they both go. Tommy's figured out how to, or how he thinks he, you know, basically actually killed Jason for good. Of course, Jason wouldn't have been dead for good if Tommy hadn't brought him back to life. But whatever, he's an idiot. So he's actually, you know, read some books, and he's had a chance to figure out the way to kill him for good is to return him to his, you know, or to bury him at his the place where he drowned, making his, you know, place where he drowned his final resting place. So he's basically gets a bunch of chain, and he goes to the Camp Forest Green with Megan after, you know, just like so many of the other sequels, pretty much all of them since part 2, the main characters aren't at the camp when all the mayhem's, you know, going on, and then they get there after everyone's been killed. It's something that I think is started in part 2, and they do in every single sequel, pretty much after part 2, and this is, you know, no exception. So after everyone's pretty much dead except the campers, of course, that obviously the filmmaker's not going to have Jason kill the campers. Tommy and what's her name? Megan arrive at Camp Forest Green, and, you know, Tommy finds this huge rock, which there's no way he'd ever be able to roll, you know, into the boat, but he puts this big, huge rock, he puts his chain around this rock, gets in a boat, and, you know, basically he's going to try to, you know, go out in the boat and lure Jason out there, and his idea is to put the chain around his neck and, you know, with the rock, and basically re-drown Jason again in the place he originally died, which of course he didn't die because he was alive until he got killed, and then thanks to Tommy, he's brought back to life again, and now he wants to kill him again. So I don't know if this might be just some kind of the fetish Tommy's got, where he's got to, you know, keep killing Jason over and over. Maybe it's his, you know, life purpose. I don't know, but that's what Tommy towards the end of the movie, you know, decides to do. So just like 4 and 5, this movie kind of completes. It's funny because they do it in the Tommy Jarvis movies. I think they only do it in the Tommy Jarvis movies, unless you count him going through the glass, you know, door in Jason Takes Manhattan. But just like with 4 and 5, this would end the Jason coming through the door shtick, where he comes through the cabin door, and in a kind of a scene that doesn't really make any sense towards the end of the movie, where Jason comes crashing through, you know, one of the cabins full of kids. And, you know, I don't think Jason's intent was ever to kill a kid, because his whole problem with, you know, all these counselors is that, you know, they let him die when he was a kid. He doesn't have any beef against kids. So that's kind of one of the only other things that doesn't make sense in the movie, is why Jason terrorized, you know, smashed through the door, you know, with the cabin full of kids, and terrorized them at the end, which of course, you know, that, you know, leads Tommy to start calling out, "Megan, no!" It's so funny because he's like, go back to the cabin with the kids, and then she starts running towards the cabin with the kids, like, "Megan, no! Megan, no!" And at that point, he's able to get, you know, to lure Jason out into the lake with his now famous line, "Come on, Megan Head! Come on, Megan Head!" And so, you know, Jason comes out into the lake, and, you know, it's so stupid in the Freddy vs. Jason how they have an element of Jason being afraid of water. I mean, it's just like absolute bullshit, like in part 6, and, Part 7, he's just in water voluntarily. And when Freddy vs. Jason came out, he's like, "Jason's afraid of water." I'm like, nope. That was a point that I was so pissed off about when that movie came out. But so, at the end of this movie, Tommy basically lures Jason out of the water with this thing that really wouldn't do it, but it's really a nice visual thing to see on camera, where he basically takes the boat motor gas and dumps it in the lake and lights it on fire to basically boil Jason out of the water. It should be said that obviously they use these these gas jets under the water to make this effect. If you really pour gas in water and light it, it just goes poof and disappears. We've done it before when I was a teenager, so if you're wondering if that works, no, it just burns up right away and it's gone. So what happens with the lighting the lake on fire in this movie isn't very realistic, but we're not supposed to know that, but it is visually really cool. And so at the end of the movie, Tommy Jarvis does manage to succeed and rope the chain attached to a rock around Jason's neck and get him down at the bottom of the lake, and the rock landing on the "Welcome to Camp Crystal," the original from the first movie, "Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake" sign with blood, painted on it by someone, some mad, teenager, whoever the hell did it. It's really another just a cool detail that having the rock land on that sign, and Jason looks like he's actually drowning, of course, and then Megan saves the day by going out there and pulling Tommy, who's been basically drowned by Jason. Megan goes out there and saves him and gets attacked by Jason, and I think that's really cool to have. And then she basically takes the outboard motor and turns it on and aims it towards Jason's face, and it kind of chops basically Jason's neck off, and and it's really cool to kill Jason with an outboard motor. But so that's the end, man. That's the end of Jason Lives, Friday 13th Part 6, the end of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. And after the first movie, or final chapters, looking out his bedroom window and seeing a couple getting it on or getting naked or whatever, he's 2 movies later, or at the end of his 3rd movie, he's actually got his own girl. So that's kind of a cool closing out of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. And of course Jason is buried under the water for all time, never to come back again until, well, a couple years later in Part 7. But I would give this movie 3.5 stars out of 4 stars. It's an absolute riot, absolute fun. Having seen it many times when I was 12 years old, every time I watch it now, it just brings me right back to that summer, just watching, even though it was off TV, I mean, it's still better than not watching it at all. It was still, I wasn't really that picky back then, and it was still watching the majority of the movie, so I mean, it was just a hoot, recording it off TV. I think when I recorded it off TV, just like with Final Chapter, I think I was alone that night, and it was just like, I don't know if did I live alone as a 12-year-old? I don't remember, but I think when I recorded this off TV, it was the same thing as Final Chapter, where it was kind of like I found myself alone at night, and it was just a hoot being 12 and being a fan of these movies. And at the time they were really brand new to me, and well, they weren't that old in themselves at the time, but it was really, really, really fun. So highly recommended Friday the 13th sequel. It's a riot, and it's just absolute fun. And what else can I say? Thank you very much for watching this review, and as always, we'll catch you on the next one.